John Brennan here with MMA Tea Company, another interview for our MMA Insider Industry Series. I have Ryan Motter here of Motter Health Associates. Motter, how are you doing today?
I'm very good. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. I wanted to bring you on today from your unique experience working with a UFC veteran and a legend in Tim Boetsch, and just kind of get your story out there, let people know, how you got to the point that you got to there in your career, how you got started, and then, what you're up to now.
Yeah, thanks for having me first and foremost, John. This is a pleasure. I think what you're doing is awesome. I'm a fan of you. I love what you're doing. Keep it going. Yeah, I met Tim when we were at Lock Haven. I went to Lock Haven to pursue a degree in exercise physiology. I always had a passion for exercise. And that came from my football days at, you and I went to the same high school, Wings Valley. You're actually, I believe, around my brother's age. So you did the whole thing. Sports was everything.
Yep.
My senior year, I tore my ACL, and it really kind of bummed me out. And when everybody was up working hard, I'd be in the weight room and trying to do what I could do. And that's kind of when I found my passion and love for exercise. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do with it. I would say I selfishly went to Lock Haven for myself to kind of explore what exercise really was and really how in-depth we could get. I didn't know if I wanted to be a physical therapist or what it was. But that's when I really found my love for exercise. And it's actually where I met Tim. Tim was recruited. He was a 4-time state champ from Maine, and Lock Haven was a big wrestling school. And they recruited him, and I met him through my one friend, Mike Sesnalevich. They were roommates, and we really shared a passion and love for just kind of getting strong. Tim was, I think he came in at 150 or 160, and they wanted him to be a heavyweight. So his love was actually bodybuilding. So it was really kind of interesting. We both loved bodybuilding at first, and that's actually what he wanted to do. And we just really kind of connected. You always kind of knew who the hard workers were in the room, the football guys, wrestlers, and that's where I started my bodybuilding career. I started competing when I was 20 years old, and he loved it. He was actually a fan of me at first. He was always asking me different diet tips and different things we could do with bodybuilding. And that's really how we created that friendship. And he actually stayed in school longer than I did. He went to, I think, pursue another degree when I got out, and we stayed in contact with email. And I'll never forget it. I'll never forget him asking me bodybuilding questions. I'll never forget him emailing and saying, I'm going to do this show in Bloomsburg. He was going to compete in Bloomsburg, and I was helping him with the dieting. It was like 2 or 3 weeks out from it. He's like, I don't think I'm going to do it. And I was like, that's weird. That's not really like him. He was always such champion mentality. And I'll never forget, it was a year or two later, I got this email from him. I was working at Hershey Gold's gym, and he said, hey, Ryan, I'm going to pursue this fighting thing. And I was like, yeah, you're probably pretty good at that. And it was like 6 months later, he's like, hey, man, come check me out in Atlantic City. I'm doing pretty good. And he holds up like these belts, like all these belts. I was like, all right. So I did. So I traveled down and I checked him out, and I went down to Atlantic City. And I'll never forget, and understanding at that point, I don't know anything about fighting whatsoever. And I just see this Russian guy's name on the main headline. And I see this guy, and I'm like, oh my God, that's who Tim's fighting? This guy's going to kill Tim. And I'm like, he's literally gonna get destroyed. And I'm nervous for him. And he comes up to me. I'll never forget this. We're in Atlantic City. I'm in Shores. He comes up and he starts just talking bodybuilding to me. He has a fight in like 20 minutes. I'm like, shouldn't you feel like this Russian guy is gonna kill you? He's like, don't worry about him. He'll be all right. And I'm like, he has a Russian name and he's scary looking. I was like, you might want to take this serious. And I'll never forget it. I was sitting in the stands, and Tim fought this guy, and he knocks him out in like 40 seconds. And so I walk up to him. I was like, what the heck, man? I was like, you're like, you might be in like UFC one day or something. And I kind of meant it sincerely. He's like, yeah, it's kind of my goal. And and they didn't think anything about it. We go out and have a good time. And I think it was a couple months after that is when he got the call from the IFL. And that's when he fought one of their big wigs. Forgive me, you probably remember, I forget what the guy's name was, Matashenko. And really gave him a run for his money. I personally actually thought he won the fight. He was supposed to get killed, and that's really when he got the call from UFC not too long after that. But it was then when, he knew I had the knowledge of weight cutting and stuff. He knew the importance of being in shape, that what that did to bring to the table. And after the first fight or two, he was fighting. I actually reached out to him. He fought in Colorado, and I could tell his heart rate was a little messed up from the acclimation. I reached out to him. I was like, hey, Tim, I was like, I know that stuff. I was like, I understand the conditioning and physiology side, and it made sense to me. He's like, yeah, I want you to join my team. So that's really kind of how we made the connection with that.
Sure. And when you are, you go down to see him fight in Atlantic City, at what point in your bodybuilding career is this?
I'm still probably in the middle of it. I'm like, matter of fact, I'll never forget him coming up to me, and I have like the sleeveless shirt on. He goes, "I could see them arms from wide away." So I was still doing it, and probably about in my prime. And again, like I think that's what made Tim and I such a connected group, is we were both always fans of each other. As
Mhm.
much as I'm a fan of his career, he was always a fan of mine, and he always supported me. And even at, I'll never forget one of the biggest shows I ever did. One of the biggest East Coast shows I did was actually when my mom was getting chemo treatment. That was my biggest motivation. My mother was going through chemo, and I wanted to kind of suffer with her. You know, some people shave their heads. I was like, I'm gonna do this bodybuilding show. And Tim was there. I'll never forget that. He showed up to the show, and I remember that meaning a ton to me. Like he was traveling, and I think he was even going to Seattle, and he and came and supported me through that whole thing. So that's always really kind of made us work, because we're always kind of fans of each other.
Sure. And, you have kind of had this same mentality since I've known you and, since I've been following your career of just kind of put your head down, work hard, and, the results will come. Do you think that mentality between you and sharing that with Tim is what kind of had you guys gel so well between the diet, nutrition, weightlifting, and whatnot?
Yeah, and honestly, this is where I got to give him more credit than me. I mean, you come from Maine, like you're a survivalist, so you're talking about mental toughness. He's as tough as a person as I ever met. I'll never forget one of the first times we started working together. Like one of the first things he said was, "Hey, I don't need anything fancy to eat." He's like, "I can live off basically anything," and there's something to that. And it's interesting that you asked that. That's one of the two different kinds of things I teach in nutrition. I personally love, you give me this beautiful piece of halibut with, the perfect spices and seed. It just looks beautiful, right? I like that. But that's not what made me a champion. What made me a champion in bodybuilding was eating sardines. And when I didn't, that's all I could afford. That's all I had. And really, Tim kind of had that mentality too. So to see him start from not making money in UFC, where he was making, I don't know, $3,000 a fight. People have no idea the humbling beginnings in the UFC, to us being able to afford it, was really the most beautiful part of the journey. And looking back on it all, to your point, the most exciting, like you look at some of the worst things that ever happened to Tim was success in terms of his fighting. It's like the whole Rocky mentality. That whole fight is reciprocated in many different things, and survival is one of them. You got to think about how you're going to get your meal the next day, where it's cans of tuna and that. Talk about grittiness and mental toughness. There's something to that. Regardless of how much salt's in them sardines, you have to make that work. So yeah, I do think we kind of connected from a survivalist standpoint with that. So yeah, great question.
And then, he starts getting some success in the UFC, right? And you're kind of along with him on this journey that not a lot of people kind of get to see, get to experience, from almost not sitting back and watching it, but you're an active role
Yeah.
in his success. How does that help you in, this next phase of your career, as you're going through, because I know you were also going through school, at the same time,
Yeah.
and working on your PhD. How does that help you, not gain notoriety, but just kind of move up in the world in what you're trying to do professionally?
I think it's something I even teach clients. I think the main word you're looking for is confidence. If you can help compete against, and you can, literally the toughest people on the planet. And I have respect for all different avenues of toughness. Trust me, military, I work with them all, SEALs, but UFC is as hard as a thing as there is for living about as perfect as you can be with sleep and stress. Like, you are a fighter. And so when you can learn to manipulate the body and brain to that level, you build so much confidence to do anything else. And one of the interesting things you said, and I remember, Tim and I were friends before we were business associates. And I remember coming to a point where I don't know if I had that confidence, and confidence also comes with opportunity. And I'll never forget, at one point I said to him, as he started growing and he started getting big, I said to him, "Tim, if you find somebody better than me," and I meant it sincerely, you got to do it, because I can easily let this go and transition you as a fan. I'll never forget what he said to me. He goes, "I can't believe you just said that to me." He said, Tim was like, you're my guy. He's like, I need you. There's nobody else. And so I remember, I swear, me being successful and me learning to do my PhD and stuff came from the sincerity of me truly wanting to be the best help I can from it. And I mean, I meant that. I really wanted to be the best at what I did to help him be the best at what he did. And that was one of always his sayings to me was, you surround yourself with people that are better than you. And in his mind, there was no, even though if on paper somebody was probably better than me, I was his guy, and he trusted me to do that. So I really had to rise the occasion to do that. But yeah, to answer your question, once you got confidence with, I mean, we were, in my opinion, not only innovative, but we changed the ball game with weight cutting. You know, people looked up. Access did a whole show on us and on weight cutting, on the level that leads into what I'm doing now with people, and ultimately working with people, all different kinds of diseases. Do I miss the MMA thing? You better believe it was such an amazing thing, but I've definitely moved on to it and wanted to see how many people in the world I can really affect.
And you said something really interesting that was, you know, on paper, people might have been better than you at that job. But when you look at a UFC fighter, right, Tim is essentially his own business.
Yeah.
Right? And I think when you're building business partnerships, there's, in my opinion, two things that really forge those relationships and those partnerships. And one is being able to trust the other person, right? And I think Tim trusted you a lot. And the other is conviction, right? You were 100% convinced that what you were doing was the right thing to do. It was working for him, and you were going to keep working hard to improve his abilities. So in that sense, do you feel like that same kind of conviction has helped you grow Modern Health Associates now, with your not being able to do it, but like telling people like, I know I'm going to be able to help you. And that's that confidence you came back to.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny, it just came to my head. I remember being in Las Vegas. We're with Mighty Mouse in the background, Matt Hume, who you know. We're doing some weight cutting stuff, and I'm watching Tim. And I remember just that level of connectivity, and we're trying to do the weight, and I'm manipulating his weight. I looked at him, I go, you lost 0.8 pounds. And he looked at me and smiled, and he went on there, and he shook his head. He goes, how did you know that? Because we had that level. I couldn't do that now to him. But then when we were doing it, there was this level of connectivity and trust that you couldn't mimic it. It was so pure, you couldn't fake it. And really learning to connect with somebody like that at the highest level, in my opinion, of weight manipulation almost makes working with other people easy. Now there's other different challenges, but from the physiologic perspective of cutting glycogen and learning sodium depletion, as in-depth science as we work, there's still a level of connectivity that you can't explain. And I couldn't. I knew he lost 0.8 pounds. I watched it. I just knew it was. I couldn't do that to anybody else at that time, but I did. So yeah, that does transfer into other people I've worked with. It's just, I think the biggest difference now is just scaled back. You know, when you're doing your kind of thing, it's not as intense. We look at other different things now. Like I want to put more facilitation into maybe mental health. I'm not worried if somebody has to be 200 pounds this week, 202 next week with their VO2 max at this. It's not as in depth. But the neat part is, once you learn the body at that degree, like best on the planet, it creates a understanding of, you know, you scale that 100% back to 70, 80% for optimal health and function. And that's what I teach clients. Sometimes the best way to learn your thresholds is to go past them. I mean, nobody wants to live that from a practicality standpoint. Nobody wants to live that in depth. You know, we did that at that time to compete with the best people on the planet. He's not doing that now. I check in with him now and be like, hey, how much salt are you putting on that chicken you're barbecuing? You know, almost kind of jokingly, but
sure.
Yeah, I mean, and I love my journey. Don't misunderstand me. I think from bodybuilding, I think one of the things I wanted to circle back on, one of the questions I got asked a lot in some of the podcasts and stuff I've done is, how do you transfer what I did in bodybuilding to MMA? And as much as they were kind of similar, it was apples and oranges, because I did take that mentality. That's really what made me learn. And another one, to answer one of your questions, was I thought that worked for me, that had to work for him. And I learned quick, that's not how it works. So everybody that I work with to this day has their own plan. If you were working with me, you're on the John Brennan plan. But if I'm working with me, I'm on the Ryan Motter plan. Two totally different plans. There's no similarities. I study your individual characteristics. I study mine. And I think like in the beginning where I'm trying to have Tim do what worked for me, it didn't work. And then slowly when I started learning his body, then I started treating him as an individual. So it came from bodybuilding, the fact that he respected, but when we start doing the MMA thing, it was a totally different calculation of macronutrient needs. You know, when you're fighting, and it's not bodybuilding, it's fighting, it's an active. And one of the neat thing is, you know, he loved bodybuilding, and there was definitely, I remember some of the different things we got caught up in was, you know, with him being on TV and stuff, he wanted that lean look, and I remember a couple times we did that, and it wasn't good for him. He operated functionally off just a little bit more fat on his body. We knew how to get his weight down lower, but he didn't function that good off it. And it was a hard thing for him to accept, because you fighters, you think you have to look a certain way, and that's not always the case. There is a level of, you know, heart rate variability and fluency and recovery that does not necessarily go with this image we envision. So that was one of the things I remember we had to break out of him. So that whole bodybuilding mentality, we really had to get rid of. I mean, I wanted him confident. There was definitely some of that stuff, but I wanted to prove to him that, you know, that little bit extra fat on his body made him more optimal.
Sure. And I actually looked up to him as, you know, some motivation for me not wanting to need to look a certain way when
Yeah.
I'm making weight. I also function the best when I have a little bit of fat on my body. I'm not going to have that ripped, shredded six pack and walk in there looking like I'm ready for a bodybuilding competition. I need to
Yep.
make the weight, but I need to be functional at the same time. And
Yeah.
I think you working with him and me seeing his evolution of being a little thicker on the scale also helped me to realize that same thing, that not everybody has to look that way.
Yeah, I had to break that out of him. And I remember, you know, the one where I got his confidence with that then when he goes, yeah, but Ryan goes, there's something when you go in the room, if you look at somebody, I was like, I hear you, I understand it. But I'll never forget when he fought Hector Lombard. Hector Lombard, I mean, looks like a Greek god. I mean, he's a beautiful body. And I remember him learning that. After the fight, he said to me, he's like, you know what? He goes, I see what you mean now. He goes, like, I fight better. He goes, my heart rate's lower. My blood pumps better, and I knew how to get his body down, and we did it.
Mhm.
And you could tell his body fought harder because it wanted that little bit extra fat in his body from performance.
For
But
sure.
it's a tough thing for me to get through a lot of fighters, because I get it. There is something to wanting to look good. I understand that, but performance and look does not always go together.
Yeah, I mean, we always used to, you know, say the saying "look good, play good" in football in high school, but that mentality does
Not
not
true.
translate well into fighting, not at all.
And every now and again, you do find these freaks like Tyron Woodley that
Yeah, your Yoel Romero's.
yeah, they do exist, but as a whole, that's not always the case. And I remember, you know, that whole bullying in UFC, as oddly as it sounds, I remember Tim, he'd probably kill me for saying this, but it is the truth. I remember people saying different things to him. Like I remember Bisbing saying some mean things to him that bothered him.
Mhm.
And it was definitely something that we really had to deal with from a separate issue. Like, hey, like we're fighting here, not so that whole thing was real with really kind of imagery and that. But I do think ultimately we found a ground that was even. That he felt he looked good, but he still had that little bit extra weight in his stomach. But I'll never forget that one fight. He looked like he was ripped, and I mean he was so built, and he won that fight, but he didn't fight good, and that's when he knew it. He knew what I was talking about. He really thought he's like, don't you think I can just adapt to it? I said, I don't think your body likes that. And the second he put, it was just a little bit more fat on his body. It was night and day. He could go all day long. His conditioning was better, which is counterintuitive to what we're taught.
Mhm. Yeah,
But
and coming now, you know, his career, he fought everybody, right? And you were kind of along the way for that whole ride. And I think, you know, one of the greatest comebacks in UFC history kind of speaks to his ability to be in condition, and that was the Yushin Okami fight.
oh yeah,
So I just wanted to get your opinion on, you know, working with him through that fight and then, you know, being along for the ride of how that went.
I put that up with, I say to him all the time, one of my top 3 favorite moments in my life. That's when I knew how blessed we really were. It was this moment that even thinking about it almost gives me chills. I remember sitting there looking up to the sky thinking, is this real? Did that really happen? And it went from one extreme to the next. I remember, I mean, me personally, and this is where I always give Tim credit. When my mother was sick, Tim was really growing in the UFC, and I remember I was bummed out,
Mhm.
and she died. And I remember Tim coming to me, and he said to me, he said, he didn't let me stay down. He goes, Ryan, I need you. He's like, I'm not just like, he goes, I understand your grief. I get that, but you got to snap out of this. He's like, I have to have you. He's like, I remember him saying, he goes, we'll see your mom on the other side. We'll do that, but I need you now. And I remember like kind of forcing myself through that. And that was around the Yushin Okami fight. And I remember that was really the moment that made me relive again. Because I remember flying to Japan thinking, what in the heck are we doing? He went before I. And I had a couple clients that traveled there, so I'm kind of asking. I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, I'm at that point. I think we traveled to Detroit, and I don't know, California. Maybe I went to. I'm going to Japan by myself. I don't know what I'm doing. I get out and I look around. And I was like, "What is happening? Why am I here?" And just kind of lost in life. We do the whole thing. I remember we're doing our weight cutting. We're supposed to use distilled water, and they don't have it, and I'm trying to run around. We end up getting regular water. Ultimately made realize that we did better with the regular water compared to distilled water, which was, different than what I was taught. So through this madness, we learned what worked better, kind of being innovative, like you and I are going through right now with this COVID stuff. And we go and start, and I'm ringside, and I'm looking around seeing all these fans. I'm like, this is just, I can't explain, it's almost like a dream. And Tim just starts getting beat up. I'm like, well, why am I here? And I would be a liar to say that I didn't give up on him, but I'm like, man, this sucks. Like, we came all the way over here, and I'm gonna have all this jet lag for this, and I'll never forget him coming back. And I almost like had to pinch myself, and I'm like, that's when I knew who Tim really was. I was like, that's a guy that I'll never be. I like that he is a special guy.
Mhm.
I mean, you're talking about a guy who does not give up in his head. And when I knew Tim was the real deal, when I jokingly said to him one time when he first got the UFC, he goes, I'm going to fight Fedor. And I started laughing at him. He goes, I can beat him. He's dead serious. He was dead, and he's still serious to say, oh, I'd beat him. He's not that tough. In his mind, there is nobody that he can't beat. Like, and anybody that did beat him, it was something that I was like, yeah, but it's because this was going on, and you can't take that away from him. So the fact that he came back, there was no doubt in his mind that was going to happen. He even said, he goes, I wasn't getting beat up that bad. I'm thinking, yeah, you go. Get crushed. But he's like, yeah, but he wasn't hurting me. So, and him coming back, and he wasn't even surprised. He wasn't even that pumped. He's like, yeah, I told you guys I was going to win. And talking about an inspiration, man, to work with somebody that you're a fan of is an amazing thing. It's just, it makes you work harder because I took that upon myself. I wanted him to truly, I want to see how far he can do this. I mean, you're talking about somebody's dream. I mean, if you look at, I was just on a podcast with Tim the other day, and that was one of the things that he gave me credit to. He goes, everybody gave credit to Ryan for helping me do this weight cutting, which was its own thing. He said, but what most people don't give him credit for is how long my career lasted. He goes, I'm one of only a handful of fights. He goes, that was from what he did. He goes, I didn't do this yo-yo fad dieting. I did it for the long run, and his nutrition helped my recovery, my inflammation. And I think he's only one of 10 fighters, 15 fighters of over 25 fights, and he's unscathed. His brain's good. His body's relatively good. He told me the only time he hurts now is if he doesn't exercise. If he feels as young and of a spring chicken as ever.
And I think that speaks to just the way that, you guys are able to work together, but then his motivation and his determination to be the best. Like you said, it wasn't one of those yo-yo diets. He's not the kind of guy that only trains 8 weeks out of the year when he has a fight coming up.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of, young regional fighters can look to him as someone they can model themselves after, because he did the things that he needed to do the right way.
And that's what I'm most proud of him right now is if you look at Arnold's level of success, the big thing is giving back. And that's finally where he's at. He started coaching wrestling and people are starting to look up to him. And I told him, I said, this is your last stage of success. This is what you're supposed to be doing. Because I asked him, I said, does it still bother you to fight? He said, oh yeah. He said, when I start training, it makes you want to eat good. And even though I don't do it, it's still kind of in me. So to kind of get that and replicate to young fighters, I think is is so good for him. And such a challenge for him, because he said to me, he goes, Ryan, I can't always get through these kids. It's this impatience that he has. And I said, Tim, most people don't think like you. I said, you have to recognize that and learn how to inspire people individually. And I remember him I'm going, I never really thought about it like that. I was like, people are not you. People are their own selves. So to find their motivations from person to person is challenging. And that's what I do. It's its own thing. But to find somebody motivated like that, like Tim, it's almost amazing the things you can learn, because a guy like him is one in a million.
For sure. And that's why he was at, the top of the world.
Yeah.
It takes that kind of mentality of that 1% to get there. Now, your career, we started in bodybuilding, and, you were a champion in that. And then you go on and you work with, one of the most recognizable, one of the best fighters who has fought in the UFC. And now you're, running your own business, Modern Health Associates. So, who are you working with? What's your clientele like? What are you, doing, especially now during, these lockdowns, whatever we're, experiencing?
Well, I want to start the conversation. I was honored. I was honored this week. Williams Valley actually contacted me to do their high school graduation speech, kind of like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I really found that meant a lot to me, because of, really my career. And I think the neat thing that that I'm going to go off of with this speech is ultimately, and that's what I was most proud of what you're doing. I have created a business and everything success I've ever done in my life off straight turmoil. And even Rogan even said it the other day, if you were listening to this podcast, this COVID stuff is there's a part of him that likes it. And oddly, me too. I bought an iPad, John, you're going to love this. I bought an iPad for Tim when we started working in Seattle 10 years ago for us to do manipulation. I was that ahead of the curve. I knew that this was going to exist, but I didn't do it. And I'm a critic. I'm hard on myself about it. I knew that's what I needed to do. I knew that was the way of the future, but I didn't do it. I was that far ahead of that game. So the very first iPad I bought to do this business virtually, and I didn't do it because I don't know why. I need to be forced to change. When all this happened, this COVID stuff, about a month and a half ago, I had 3 days that I felt really sorry for myself. I'm cranking clients. I have everybody. I got housewives, kids, high school athletes, all over the place. And I love it. I love the diversity. I have 80-year-old stroke victims. I have the most unathletic, picked last at recess girl who's 11 years. I love it all. There's not one that I don't love. I love ridiculously crazy athletes. I like people that hate exercise. I want them all. And it got all taken away from me. And I remember feeling real sorry for myself. And that's what happens to me. I remember, like I told you, when my mom died, I felt sorry for myself. I picked myself back up. I remember in bodybuilding, I wanted to do bodybuilding and had no money. I thought that I can't buy Isopure protein, that I couldn't do it. And I learned how to use sardines, eating squirrels and deer meat and scummy eggs to become a champion. And when I couldn't always afford my gym membership, I'm doing pull-ups off a tree, holding a rock between my legs. Like, it's what makes me who I am. And so part of this crazy transition is I'm starting an online membership of this kind of comprehensive health idea, where we study things like social, spiritual, physical, environmental health, and look at health as a whole to identify all these different things that affect our health. Basically, what I did with Tim, what made Tim and I work together, is we focused on all that. I just didn't do Tim's nutrition. I did his sleep. I did his mental stress management. We did it all. So now that we can't go to the gym and we are forced to be inside, I'm going to create a membership that we can do all this, not only exercise on from home, but different recipes we can do from home, different ideas of how financial health affects our health, and just bring other experts in like you're doing with me and talk about that to create this kind of comprehensive approach to health. So that's one aspect of the business. The other one is, being that telehealth got so big, I started to do kind of what you're doing with people, where I get to work with clients I worked with years ago that, they worked for Hershey Company. Now they moved on. Some are in California, some are in New York City. And one of my clients, like, he's great. He was actually the one that was in charge of the Super Bowl party this year. He is the main designer for Pepsi, and he did the Shakira thing. And, so some of these high profile executives that I work with, I get to work with them now that they have their own little home gyms and I'm kind of manipulating their form. So I've evolved in that. So it's one of the things I teach. When there's a will, there is a way. And if you can find out, I love unstableness. I hate that about myself. But this whole thing that's going on right now, it makes me a better professional because I don't do good living comfortable. I will tell you that. I need to be challenged. I love the fact of feeling down. I love the fact of fighting up because it's one of my mottos, get comfortable feeling uncomfortable. So this whole thing has almost been euphoric for me that I'm reestablishing my business, doing an online membership site to teach people the right ways to move and eat and then start the telehealth. So, and that's what to me makes life worth living is this kind of reinventing this. It's kind of something you're doing too. And these positive changes you're making, you'd be surprised how what you're doing now will make you a better fighter. I bet it'll blow your mind how it'll make you a better fighter. But you're exploring different avenues in your brain and thinking that others don't.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You said something that I always say to all of our young fighters, young jujitsu, practitioners, things like that. And it's that you need to find a way to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing that, I'll take away from this is that, that mentality is what kind of has molded me for a long time. I mean, my dad told me when I was young in football and I didn't want to run the lap before the sprints afterwards because I was fat and out of shape. He said, your body will go a lot longer than your mind will want it to. And I've just kind of kept that up, throughout my career in business and in fighting. And so far it's been working. So I'm going to keep, rolling with that.
Yeah, heck yeah. I mean, you got to embrace that madness. It's what makes, and oddly, I like the feeling of defeat, like that feeling I had of 3 days of defeat, and not to describe, every personality is different. Do I believe in, some people being on depression and anxiety medication? For sure. Some people deal with chronic stress that affects us. But me, if you put me down about 3 days, that is so good for me. It is so humbling for me because when I'm up, it makes it so much more reward. It's so much more euphoric, so much more alive. And that comes from that. One of the craziest transitions I ever made that I didn't get to talk about was going from bodybuilding to gymnastics. Talk about apples and oranges. I mean, I had to be brave enough to be bad at something. So when I started gymnastics, I was horrible, and I mean horrible at it. And I took 2 years where I was just about as basic as can be. And I saw myself growing up. So here I am kind of conquering bodybuilding. Where do I go kind of when I'm here? Well, back down to start somewhere else. And if you embrace that whole ideology and philosophy in your life, it never gets boring. You're always up and then you're down and then you're up. And that's normal. That's to me what makes life worth living. Everything, business, fighting. I challenge you to do it in anything. One of my favorite Conor McGregor quotes, which is almost counterintuitive to the whole thinking, don't fear the man who studied 1,000 different kicks, fear the man that studied the one kick 1,000 times. His mentality is more like mine. He said, don't be a master at one thing 100%, be a master at a lot of things 80%. And that's pretty much what I've done. I'm really good at nutrition, but I know nutritionists better than me, but they don't necessarily know exercise or anything. I know exercise really good, but I definitely know physiologists alone that know more than me. I know all these different things, about 80% of them, because I adopt that philosophy. One of the biggest things I got into even a couple of years ago was psychology, and it makes you more well-rounded and a better person. So even this whole thing with technology, as much as I don't like it, it's good for me, and it's oddly making me a better professional. That was kind of the weird thing. The first session I did a couple months ago, where I'm working with somebody, it forced me to see things. It took senses away from me, and it forced me to see things that I couldn't see before. And I thought to myself, I didn't see that when I was standing beside that person. And so it's making me better. But it's because you're constantly creating environments that I'm not comfortable with. So it's forcing you to use other senses to get better at it.
Sure. And I think, using those things, like just us today on this call, at the beginning, I had to say, well, this is my first time using Zoom to record, had to start a recording, looked at it, didn't like it, and had to change it. And now that kind of is how we adapt moving forward in this life that we're living. Before I let you go, I wanted you to kind of just let everybody listening, let them know how they can find you on social or online, and if they want to join your program, how they can go about doing that.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, so look me up on. I have Instagram and Facebook. Follow the Matter Health Associates page. That's Matter. It's spelled like matter, pronounced like Matter. Matter Health Associates. Um, at modernhealthassociates.org is the website. And yeah, looking to get a membership. We're going to have an affordable price here in the future. We're soon going to do a launch with it. You're going to have the top health professionals. I have Tim on there with some of the weight cutting we have. I have one of my colleagues is a professor for Harvard University nutrition. We have the top people on there giving the best information. It's not Atkins stuff. It's good quality information that's really ridiculously effective. So look me up on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Modern Health Associates, but more importantly, go to the website.
Awesome, Ryan. I really appreciate your time today. I'll be in touch. Stay safe, and I'll hope to see you soon.
For sure, John. Good luck to you.
Awesome. Thanks. Same to you.
Bye.